All right, so let's just start with what we're seeing now, a couple of days before voting starts. What kind of disinformation, malign influence, FEMI, whatever term we're going to use, are we seeing being deployed now just as Europeans go to vote?
What we're right now seeing is a certain level of disinformation being deployed, primarily targeting specific candidates in the race. This is going through traditional social media. Of course, there are still ongoing campaigns in echo chambers, primarily focused on the peer-to-peer messaging apps. But I would not say that the volume or scale at this moment as we speak is overwhelming. But of course, as the data suggests, we have to be aware that the disinformation campaigns pick up typically at the last 2 days before the elections.
Right, because that's when it's harder for fact checkers to have time to actually check the information and get out the other side of the story or debunk. And certainly they can't pre-bunk the stories when they don't know what's being prepared. And has everything else been fairly typical, fairly what you expected, sort of campaigning against aid for Ukraine, trying to tell European citizens that the money should be spent somewhere else? Have you seen anything that was maybe not what you expected?
Well, these are the long-term narratives that we've seen for a long time, and of course they are contextualized within the context of the European Parliament elections. So we see that. What we're looking for, whether there will be any cases of generative AI uses in the election disinformation campaigns, we haven't seen much yet. Yet, of course, I would say there's still more time, and the last 2 days are the most precarious in that say. So we're taking a very, very hard look.
Yeah, I heard this also from another analyst that AI, was one of our big fears. And would we be able to tell when something is fake? Would we be able to convince voters that it was fake? And in fact, it has not been used to the extent that it might have been thought. Why do you think that is? Or do you think it's really being saved for these last-minute disinformation campaigns?
Well, I'm afraid we'll see. But my hypothesis is that the technology has been moving so fast that even for malign actors, it's been hard to catch up and integrate this as a toolkit. And of course, it's just a question of time, whether they'll be ready to do that within this week. But I'm sure they will use this as one of their tools in the future. I'd say next half of this year, I'm certain we'll see more of it. And of course, we have to really amp up our own preparations for these kind of eventualities, because as you rightly said, technology is not perfect for detecting is it true or false.
And not only detecting, but then getting the word out to people. I mean, and the average person is not like you or I, where we're really tracking this and looking for the cases. How hard is it just in general for fact checkers, for media literacy advocates, to sort of force this information, the debunking information or pre-bunking information, on the electorate, which kind of doesn't want to be bothered with this stuff?
Well, yes, it is very hard. And that's one of the reasons why debunking is not very effective, is because people are already set in their views. And so it's very hard to dissuade them from those. Pre-bunking is more effective, but much more difficult because you have to predict what is going to happen. What I think is AI, as much as a threat, it can be also a possibility for the disinformation detectors and the ones that try to debunk or work on creating resilience against disinformation. AI, at least in our work, has also been instrumental to detect campaigns, to link the actors, see the networks, and etc. So I think it is very much on both sides about AI capabilities being amped up.
So, Jānis, when we talk about we being able to debunk or pre-bunk, I'm sort of like putting you and me and, the side of the people who want the truth out on the same side. But it actually, there are a lot of different actors on both sides, but on the side of those trying to get out the facts, you've got different players. You've got the institutions, because the EU versus disinfo, and NATO's fact checking, and then you've got sort of autonomous centers of excellence like yours. You've got these journalist collaboratives. You've got Edimo. All of these different people who are trying to get out the truth or the facts. So do you think that we've come a long way since the last European elections in 2019 in banding together and joining forces so that people are hearing the correct information from a lot of different directions?
Well, certainly we've done much more than we've been doing during 2019, yet it's not enough. The ecosystem, the landscape has changed. There's war in Europe. There's increasing geopolitical clash ongoing. There is a much more technological angle to these questions and campaigns. And although, yes, we are more and we're doing more, that is not sufficient. In particular for Europe, I would point directly at the AI capability and the embracing of this technology also to our own benefit, to be able to equipped with the latest technology to combat these problems.
But how could it ever be enough? I mean, the disinformation, the simply campaigns designed to sow confusion, I mean, they feel unlimited.
Well, they are, and disinformation, one might argue, has always been throughout the history of humans. But for democracy, that is really, really important area where we have to limit the impact, because we want our internal debate, our discussion being based on true views of people and citizens and on facts of the world as it is. And therefore, it is important to limit the scope and scope of this, although one can really understand that it will be always an uphill battle, because unfortunately, as I've said, technology and also the internal societal processes create a vectors of the attack that we have to just combat.
And another, I mean, the biggest obvious change, as you've mentioned a couple of times, from 2019 is that instead of Russia simply wanting to influence general topics in its favor, you have the biggest topic, dominating budgets, dominating discussion in Europe, dominating fears in some frontline states, with Russia playing the most active role. So it has a real stake in these elections in a way that might have been more diffuse in the previous ones. So how has that changed how Russia is determined to target these elections, and the parliament in particular, which will make some very big decisions about aid to Ukraine in its next term?
Well, for current Kremlin's leadership, this is an existential battle, and they clearly see that they are trying to win it, not as much on the front line as targeting the support from the West, especially in a political environment. And that's why this political election year is so important for them, to promote the narratives, the forces that would be ready to stop this support to Ukraine and undermine the European and transatlantic security. So that's what's their angle. That's why they're working, and that's why they will be employing these mechanisms to pursue these goals.
We see that the Kremlin's budget is estimated at 1.5 billion for propaganda purposes in a year. And in the Washington Post investigation that just came out yesterday, they found that it may have been spending $1 million per month on paying politicians, some of them already elected to the European Parliament, some of them running as candidates, $1 million per month on encouraging them to spread pro-Kremlin views. I mean, is this a shocking amount of money under those circumstances?
I'd actually say that's a conservative estimate. The estimates in some of the other agencies in the region, actually, that amount is higher, because there are many ways of funding these activities. So I'd say that's a conservative estimate. And I think that pretty much reflects the reality that they see this as a key battleground, and they have no rules in there, and they pursue it to reach their goals, to create a desirable outcome for Russia and Kremlin in Ukraine and undermine European security.
But you can only blame half of it on the Kremlin. The other side is, of course, the European politicians happy to play along and take the money.
Well, that has been always a problem. It's not a new thing. We can look from the archives from the Cold War, from other periods. That has always been the case. The problem is it's too easy to do so. And we've been, what I would argue, somewhat complacent and not shining the light on these cases sufficiently. And also sometimes in some of the cases where it has been evident that there is some sort of collaboration between a given politician and Kremlin, it has not been brought to the forefront why and how, and the money instrumentals and other instrumentals that are at play in these relationships. And that is a very important factor to be brought to public attention.
True, but not in time for the election. Some people have been put under sanctions, a handful of the Kremlin's apparatchiks, but some of these politicians accused of taking money are still running and will probably be reelected. How concerning is that? We know they're taking Kremlin money, or it's evident they're taking Kremlin money, and they're going to be sitting in the European Parliament making decisions about aid to Ukraine and other Russia-linked policies.
That is obviously the question to the legal frameworks within a given countries. Also, the country I'm sitting right now, Latvia, had one of these cases, but now legal framework has been adapted so that this person cannot stand for re-election anymore. But that is about the legal frameworks and the ways we adapt our own systems resilience to prevent these cases to happen.
But they haven't moved fast enough. Just to repeat, some of these people will be re-elected to parliament, it looks like.
It is a complex organization with 27 countries, 27 different dynamics. So unfortunately, it's not the fastest, but I think at least what we can recognize, as we both agreed from 2019, there have been big improvements. Of course, as I've said, more needs to be done. But I think there is a realization that there is a need to be done, and I hope the new parliament will act upon it.
How concerning is it that, for example, the country that will take the next 6-month presidency of the EU is one of the biggest disinformers, openly fabricates things about the EU at this very moment? His Fidesz, his party, is campaigning on this idea that the EU would enforce mandatory conscription across the EU, which it can't even do, and yet it doesn't drop this narrative. It's one thing that you say the Kremlin is trying to influence people here. It's another to have one of the EU countries itself basically running the same lines.
Well, the nature of the information space has changed very much to the logic of the social media and the algorithms that have been making social media so effective through emotions and instincts. And accordingly, many political campaigns have adjusted to pursue this kind of campaigning, which is was a different way of approaching things and different standards. So I think that is more or less an indication and a reflection of the reality of the information space as we have it right now.
Well, if you go apart from the lies, it's not illegal or in any other way punishable to hold views that are positive toward Russia. So how do you balance that if you're talking about fact checking, but there are candidates, people, even governments that are openly pro-Russia? How damaging is that for European unity and for the stated goals of the EU to help Ukraine win the war?
Well, first and foremost, I think that's the most important thing is that when we talk about the influence campaigns, we delineate between the original views and actual views of a people, which everyone is entitled to, and there's a freedom of opinion, obviously, in any democracy. Yet, in the cases where there's an organized attempt to pursue foreign hostile goals in the information environment is a different thing. and secondarily, when the actors are being paid or having benefits for pursuing these. And therefore, this important distinction is where we have to draw the line between those that actually think in that way or are acting on behalf of this foreign government to create the specific effect. Of course, as I've said, EU, 27 countries, different views on different subjects. And I think that's one of the things that I think is in a way a strength in the democracy, that after all, we're able to come together to the solutions throughout very, very intense, throughout very difficult debates. But I think so far EU has come up with the solutions, probably sometimes later than necessary, at least in my personal point of view, but always been able to actually come to the right decisions at some point.
But there are estimates that now a quarter of the new EU Parliament may go to the far right, and not all far right parties are pro-Kremlin. Some, in fact, have exactly the same views on the war in Ukraine as, you know, their more center or left-leaning colleagues. But some of them very much, AfD and others, are the ones who have been seen to be sort of collaborating with Kremlin talking points. So with numbers like that coming into the parliament, how concerned are you that disinformation will help get people elected, which then will truly change the direction of European policy?
Well, yes, that's the environment of the day. And I wouldn't say that Europe is singular in that situation. I think that is more or less a tendency in many of the democracies around the world. So that's an actual reality. In my view, it strongly reflects also in the way the social media has impact on the information ecosystem. So once again, what I think is important to delineate between those that have a view of their own and the ones that are paid or supported in putting forward these kinds of views, and that's important delineation. And there are agencies across all the member countries that are responsible to detecting these relationships and putting them to the public scrutiny. So that's, I think, an important element. But I trust that the outcome of the European Parliament elections, we will have a functional parliament that reflects the views of the EU citizens, and they will recognize the importance of this time to the European security and the well-being of the European citizens.
So your last statement makes me think that you don't believe disinformation will get the best of election campaigns, that people won't elect new parliamentarians based on false narratives.
Well, it's like always, we can view the glass full, half full or half empty. Of course, there will be effects from disinformation campaigns. It's been the feature over the last 8-7 years in any political campaign. It's hard to estimate actually how much direct causality we have between disinformation and the outcome, and the research community is still looking for the instruments to create these causalities and data. But certainly that is a fact of life. That is an information environment. But I don't think in the essence of it, it will have such a big impact that it will derail EU from its processes.
And we talked only about Russia, but there are also other countries interested in doing some of the same things, influencing policy in the EU, also to their benefits. China, of course, is considered the second biggest producer of disinformation in this space. Have you seen any big impact of Chinese disinformation on the campaign? And what about Iran, some of North Korea, some of the smaller countries smaller producers of disinformation doing this?
So what we've seen is China is growing its disinformation infrastructure in Europe across different countries, but they've been recently far more cautious in using that infrastructure, especially in a political context. As I've said, it's the beginning of the week, the vote is the end of the week, we might say, and see different next week. But at this point, we've not seen much from there.
And if you were to give voters advice, what would be the biggest tips you would give them for those who actually want to make sure they're not duped heading into the vote?
Well, first and foremost, think. Think when you see information. Think when you have information that creates a lot of emotions and has an instinctive response to it. Think when you see the information that is highly talking to what were your internal beliefs, because all of these are the signs that something might be wrong, because the facts and the world is rather complex and it cannot be put in one simple, outrageous, or encouraging sentence. It's much more complex. So my plea to the voters is think.
And just one last one. Don't you think that European politicians need to hold themselves to higher standards as well? We have seen them willfully employing these tactics that they may have seen foreign influencers use. Don't Europeans need to hold themselves to higher standards than this, or is that just too much to ask of politicians trying to get elected?
Yeah, well, I think as I've said before, they're going along with their flow. And unfortunately, the information landscape is changing in a way that encourages these kinds of behaviors and gives a good feedback from those that act this way. But of course, we have to set the rules. We have to set the standards. And in particular, right now, I think it is very important with AI incoming. It is very important to have also the rules of using these new technologies in the election context. And I know a number of countries, for instance, Latvia, is as we speak legislating on what generative AI in particular, means to the election process, what is allowed, what's not. And I think we have to quickly do that also for other European countries.
This is getting very long, but one last one that I just realized. I didn't ask about the platforms. Do you think when you talk about having to legislate this, has the European-wide legislation on platforms forcing them to label political advertising, forcing them to take down illegal content, falsified content when it's identified, has that been effective so far, or are we sort of just getting started with the DSA and the really mandatory measures, and it's too early?
Well, it's a story of two tales. From one side, you can see platforms are trying to do more than they did before. Yet on the other side, when we look at what is possible or what hostile actors are able to do within these platforms, they still have quite a good ability to penetrate those and field their operations on those platforms. So despite the fact that they raised up their effort, I think it's still an area where hostile players can do their damage.